This is the Power Lunch, Dickson County issues for Dickson County listeners. Now to your hosts for the Power Lunch on WDKN and the 1FM.
Welcome into the Power Lunch. We're just a couple of minutes late here with getting the show going, and that's my fault. We were outside talking, but before we get into our subject for today, I do want to tell you we're going to have football tonight. Creekwood traveling to White House with a 7 o'clock kickoff, 6:30 pregame show presented by A1 Signs. So that's a big game. White House coming in unbeaten, Creekwood looking for a spot in the playoffs. Last night, Dickson County played host to Independence, and while it was a tight game early on, the Cougars eventually faded 49-24. Darian Burns, our MVP last night. We'll also have UT football tomorrow, an 11 o'clock kickoff as they take on South Carolina, looking for a little revenge from last year. And on Monday night, we will have the Titans and the Colts. They'll get started at 6:30 with a 7:30 kickoff. All those games can be heard on both WDKN 1260 AM and 101.5 The 1 FM. 11:39 the time. It is a lovely October day outside. It's Friday the 13th, and we hope you're staying lucky. 66 degrees in downtown Dickson right now, and to be quite honest, it's a good day to be talking about what we're talking about today. We have Miss Sue Alexander. Should I call you Sue? Is that? That's good. All right. Well, she's an author. She's got a book out right now. It's called The Minister's Haunting, and we're going to be talking about that. But before we get to that, I have to ask, we've been talking before the show about all the books that you've written. How did you start writing?
Well, actually, as a child, I wrote plays, and we put them on in the garage and charged parents for them. So I started young. I've had a lot of dreams all my life, and I've kept a dream book. So when I got ready to write, I just could go back and look at some of the dreams to get the ideas.
That every bit of that is fantastic. I love the fact that you were industrious enough as a child to say, maybe 10 cents, you could come watch the play.
That's about all they paid, a nickel or 10 cents.
Hey, money is money when you're a kid. I remember collecting nickels. They add up after a while. Now, you were also telling me you're not originally from Dickson. You grew up in Bolivar?
I grew up in Bolivar, Tennessee. My dad was the resident dentist for Western State Hospital for 30 years. So the first 18 years of my life, I lived inside the gates of Western State Hospital, and my home address was a post office box. So when I went to Union University, that really caught some eyes when people said, "You're from Western State," and I said, "Yes, they let me out after 18 years." I will say, though, seeing people talk to people in the air and not knowing who they were talking to because of their insanity spawned a lot of thinking about people and how their minds work, and I think a lot of my creativity came from being in that atmosphere.
Well, I was going to say some of the subjects that you've written about, I've got to imagine you were able to draw from some experiences there. That makes a little bit of sense to me.
Well, fortunately, my mother was a strong Christian, so she kept me in a Baptist church upbringing where I didn't move over too far to the haunted side.
That's very good. Now, Miss Alexander, you're a Christian author.
Yes, I am exclusively Christian author, although they tell me that mine has a lot of secular themes that go, but I write with no cursing or anything that anyone couldn't read.
Sure.
But you can't leave out true life without talking about some bad things happening.
Well, that's very fair. I think a lot of times, if you watch Christian TV program or you hear contemporary Christian music, things like that, a lot of times it's almost portrayed as though if you have a Christian faith, everything should just be positive and sunny at all times. And I don't know your stance, but I think a lot of being a Christian is dealing with adversity and how you handle it, and some of the darker things that I'm sure you talk about in your book, that they're just part of life. You can't get through life without that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I met this minister and his family about 4 years ago. They did not know I was an author when they told me about their ghostly haunting. So the next week I called him back and I said, "Hey, I write novels. Do you mind if I have your story? Put it in novel form." So I began to interview them. I interviewed the pastor first, then the wife, and the 2 children who were under 14 at that time when the hauntings happened. They would not leave their ministry because he was in a church at that time, a Methodist church. He said, "I will not let these spirits run me out of my home or destroy my ministry. So this is a great story of adversity where he kept his ministry, but they never told anyone all this was happening. And during that time, the boys, the two sons that were experiencing were having a terrible time, and one of them even had to talk to a child psychiatrist because he didn't understand what he was seeing and what he was hearing. So Christians go through just as much as anybody else does with the struggle with the spiritual world.
It's interesting to hear your story. I see the title, The Minister's Haunting, and I think, is the title telling me what I think it's telling me? And it is. You're saying this was a Methodist minister who dealt with a haunting in his home while he was ministering to a congregation. Is that
That's
accurate?
correct, and they didn't tell anyone. I think some of their closer relatives knew, and all I could say is that around people, they open up around me. That's how I get my stories. It's almost like it's meant to be, because I can meet someone and they immediately tell me their life story. And I mean, I guess that's just part of my, what is the word? Mentoring, maybe.
That's probably fair, and that that's a good way to go about getting your material. I'm curious how, as a family, you mentioned one of the children had to, without giving too much away in the book, you mentioned that one of the children had to seek psychological help over what was going on. What are some of the things that they dealt with during this time?
Well, they heard things, they saw things, objects moved, things that didn't have electrical things moved, things were torn down. If you've seen the haunting from Connecticut, it's almost equal to something like that. I really look for this to eventually go into a movie if we get the right connections, because it's so dramatic.
Now, is this... I'll come back to the book, but is this aspect, something that has always interested you as far as hauntings and that sort of thing?
As a Christian, it's not something I would normally write about, but since it involved a Christian family, and the older son slipped out and told the bishop of Tennessee that they lived in a haunted house, and that's how all this escaped. And then they said, he heard the story, and then he said, well, someone really should write this because other people experienced this. And the minister's wife said she already did. So they then contacted me and said, go ahead and let's just publish the book through your company, Susander Publishing.
Well, that's...
So it's been out 3 weeks. We're waiting to see what internet will do. Sales doing pretty good locally.
You've picked a pretty good time for it. As I mentioned, we're sitting here on
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
Yes.
Widely considered one of the most haunted days you could have, second only to maybe Halloween, is when a Friday the 13th pops up. And of course, a few weeks out in front of Halloween as well. The timing couldn't be better. I just, going back to the things that they experienced, did you go to the home? Have you
Yes,
been
I
there?
did. I took pictures and walked through the house. I did not feel anything at the time, and most of it happened midnight to 3 a.m., the things that took place.
Sure.
So it's an extremely interesting. I tried to present it from a Christian viewpoint. Is it demonic activity that's taking place where terrible things have happened? Or is this spirits caught between the world because they have unresolved issues? They did not solve the problem. They merely dealt with it, but it's worth a read.
I'm curious, for you as a writer, as you're going through this book, where do you go to kind of understand some of what they're saying? Because I'm sure they're talking about things, if you haven't experienced them. We see these shows on TV where they go and the ghost hunters and things like that. But how do you go about taking their story about something that you haven't experienced and put that to paper?
Well, that's part of being a writer. You're inside the character's mind, and once I set up Brooke McLaughlin, I began to think like she thought as she experienced life. When I write, I actually don't outline anything because life happens day from day, and it just seems like I watch it unfold. And as they say things and happen things in my imagination, I simply type it into my computer. So sometimes I don't even know things are going to happen until they happen. on the page. And then when I finish the first draft, then I go back and begin my editing and my research to try to include factual things that might be interesting to people. So there's some side stories in there too that dealt with some siblings, and she's dealing also with family issues.
Now you say she. This
This
story
is the
written,
minister's wife, written from first person.
That's an interesting perspective as well, because it gives you an opportunity. If you'd written it from his perspective, I don't know that the book works the same way, because there's an expectation that a minister is going to handle things a certain way. We don't necessarily have that expectation of the minister's wife. She's able to see not only how he's handling it, but tell us how she's handling it as well. That's very interesting to me.
Well, if you go to my website, which is resdawn.net, I have all 18 books up that I've done. The first thing I published was a Resurrection Dawn 2014 series, which deals with an end-time theme and a continuing crime story. I always love to read crime, so I kind of write Christian crime a whole lot of times. And even this story, in The Minister's Haunting, has a side theme of solving a murder.
Well, it to me sounds like a perfect read for this time of year, and we encourage you to check it out. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk more, but it is The Minister's Haunting by M. Sue Alexander. You can find more information about it at resdawn.net, resdawn.net, and we'll talk about some of the other books that she's written as well when we return. You're listening to The Power Lunch on 101.5 The One and WDKN.
First things first, I'ma say all
Welcome
the
back
words
on
inside my
the
head.
Power Lunch for Friday, October the 13th. Hopefully nothing too spooky has happened in your day as we're making our way through. There are a lot of people. We're talking about The Minister's Haunting with Miss Sue Alexander, the author. There are a lot of people, though, that really look forward to Friday the 13th. I'm one of those. I think I'll probably, when my day is done here, I'm going to go home and stay inside. I try to avoid letting the bad thing happen to me, whatever that may be. But it's that time of year where people are looking for opportunities to be scared. How, if you had to grade your own book, how scary would you say this tale is?
It would be scary for some people. I'm basically, as a Christian, not afraid, because he that is greater in me is greater than he that's in the world. So I don't worry too much about being attacked,
Sure.
because I feel protected.
Well, it's a good read. I'm fortunate enough I'm getting a copy today, and I certainly appreciate that. But at The Minister's Haunting, we do want to talk about the event you've got going tomorrow at Reading Rock Books. You're going to be doing some signings, but also kind of a clinic for writers. I
have developed a little program of how to organize your thoughts and to write your own book. And I'm going to actually be giving some handouts and talking about it to interested writers. That starts at 11 a.m. at the back of Reading Rock, where they have their resale books at a big table. Mm-hmm. We'll do a round table. And then I have a little handout on how I set up my books in order to upload them on Kindle, which might be helpful if someone has a book and they really don't know what to do next.
Now, I'm curious about that, because we were just talking about some other aspects of the publishing industry. How does one go from, here's where I've typed it up on my computer, and getting it to the publisher to get a paperback copy like we have here in studio, and then also getting it uploaded to the internet for Kindle and Amazon and places like that to sell? What is that process like?
Well, there are print-on-demand companies out there that will charge you a fee anywhere from $8.99 on Amazon to $1,500 to $2,000 for you just to send your work, and they'll set it up for you. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, your ability to buy copies to sell may be only a 20% discount, whereas if you go directly to Ingram yourself, then you get a drastic discount on your copies you buy, and your profit is much greater when you sell it yourself.
Sure.
So we'll be talking about that. You have to have certain formats that are acceptable, but most of them are online, and you just go and look them up, print out, and follow it like you would any rules.
Now, is the process the same if it's a physical book as opposed to a digital?
No, it's different.
See, I do not envy you having to do some of
We
that.
learned it the hard way. We learned it by trial and error.
When did you publish your first book?
We published the first one, self-published in 2003. Before that, I had just been writing for years and cataloging books. So I had a lot of material to go back and draw from.
What made you, what was the moment where you decided, I'm going to start publishing these?
Well, my husband always said he would never pay for the publishing. So I just prayed that God would show him if it was time. And he just suddenly woke up and said, let's publish. So I said, thank you.
That's fantastic. And of course, the first book was the first book
Resurrection Dawn, 2014, from a dream in 1997. I dreamed I was waking up from amnesia and everything had changed. The crosses were being taken out of society. Churches were becoming very liberal. Christianity was on the downslide. And I began to think about it, and I told my husband, I said, someone should write this book, but I don't know enough about Revelation and Daniel to do it. So 2 years passed. During that time, I was writing gospel music. We packed up to move and build a house to Dixon, Tennessee, and they packed all my recording equipment, my guitar, every bit of my stuff was packed away, and I was so angry. I said, what am I going to do for a year? And my husband looked at me and said, write that book you've been talking about. So I wrote the first draft when I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We had an electrical pulse that destroyed it. I lost it. I didn't have it backed up. A friend came and dug it out of the hard drive, and I brought it in one of those little small discs that you bring to Tennessee. And Joe Johnson Jr., who was retired from Broadman Holman, was a friend, and he offered to edit it. So he actually taught me the skills of how to write a novel. He went through it piece by piece, told me everything I did wrong, where I needed to put commas, where I needed to put periods, where I had misplaced prepositional phrases. It was like a huge class from a college. So taking his tips on writing, then I did book 2 and ended up doing 12 books on the same character.
That's just fantastic. And it kind of a number of things falling in place just to get the first book together. Did it get easier after that first one?
Well, yeah, because I thought after I did that first book, I thought, I don't know what to do next. And then I dreamed the whole outline, and I got out in the middle of the night and I wrote out 20 things that need to be in book 2. Forgot what it was and read my list when I got up the next morning, and that's what the second book was. After that, I found out you just take what wasn't resolved in that book and move it forward, because people want to know what happened to that person when you left it off, and you just jump it forward to book 3, and that's how a series works, even on TV series.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you've talked about kind of how dreams have played a role. I hear people talk about dream journals and that sort of thing. Is that something that you use to keep up with these things?
Yes, I do. In fact, Tomorrow's Promise came from a dream. I had double ovarian cancer in 2001 and have survived it. And I wanted to write about my cancer experience, but I wanted to use a younger woman in her 40s and create a better story than what I had to tell about my personal life. So I went back and looked in my dream book, and I found a dream where I had come from Baton Rouge in my dream and moved to Charlotte, Tennessee. And I met a woman who had 5 kids that wanted a divorce in the dream, and I was having marital problems myself in the dream, so I became her mentor. So I used that theme, and the woman had a double ovarian cancer in the story. So I was able to incorporate a good storyline of an older woman helping a younger woman in her marriage while resolving her own marriage problem and detailing what she went through with ovarian cancer.
It's so interesting to me, the different topics that you've been able to cover, all while threading it back to some of the tenets of Christianity. Do you ever find it hard to incorporate the faith aspect into a book?
No, because it's such an ingrained part in me. I was taken to the Baptist church when I was 6 weeks old. So I've never known anything but faith.
That's good parenting, some would say. So it's interesting, when we were talking about Resurrection Dawn, you mentioned in your dream, though, a lot of things that people might draw parallels to the way things are in 2018. and whether that be a lot of people have seen religion taken out of many aspects of their life and in many aspects of day-to-day life. Do you feel like that book maybe is even more relevant now than it was when you originally published it?
I think a lot of things that I talked about are coming true, but you have to understand I researched Daniel, Matthew 24, and Revelation, so I built the story based on biblical principles, what they had to say about the end time. But the reason I selected a time slot between 2014 starting was the woman had her wreck in 1989. If you think about the changes that took place from 89 to 2014, they're dramatic. Well, she had what's called a memory switch. She forgot the 25 years between 1989 and 2014 and lived her life. And when she switched back, she forgot the period between. So she's an 1989 ladies living in 2014 dealing with Christianity.
That's just fascinating. Why? Because when you think about it, we talked not too long ago on this program about just the differences from 2001 to now. And 25 years, that's phenomenal. Now, of course, you can find information on all these books at resdawn.net. Obviously, a shortened version of the first book, Resurrection Dawn. You can find all the books. How many books do you think you'll write in total? Do you have a goal?
I actually have written 33 books, but I've only published 18. I have 8 more that's on a new series that's not published that I'll probably start publishing sometime next year.
Is there a subject, and I know you've had some crime focus in some of your books, you've done a haunting,
They all have a crime theme.
Okay, so there's crime in all.
Yeah, even the new ones do, because I have police that are involved, that are little sheriffs in town, and it's actually set in Bolivar, Tennessee, but I call it Fernwood, Tennessee. So it's set in my hometown.
Do you think all your books will always have crime themes in them?
They seem to slip in. Because
That's okay, though.
Because I like solving a murder.
Well, you know what? There is nothing wrong with that, I guess. That's an interesting aspect to take. Now, a reminder: the event going on tomorrow, kind of teaching you how to do what Miss Alexander
Well, I was
done.
a former teacher, so it's in me to mentor new writers, because obviously I'm not lasting forever.
Now, what did you teach?
I taught general science and math.
That doesn't necessarily translate to what you're doing.
Well,
now.
I don't know. A lot of my stuff is a little sci-fi.
Okay.
You find out. The forum is sci-fi. Vanderbilt Incident is. I have several books that deal kind of with science fiction and Christianity.
Well, I noticed whenever I was looking over the titles of your books, you mentioned the Vanderbilt Incident. I'm a big Vanderbilt person. But I'm talking about the university. What is the Vanderbilt Incident actually about?
Well, it's a group of Christians that meet once a week for prayer.
Okay.
And they lose a day. They find a bookmark in their book that she says she didn't put in there. And they start trying to figure out if they missed a day or they're a day ahead of time. And they begin to investigate. And there's something happening in the world that the FBI get wind of what they're doing, and they actually arrest this prayer group because they think they plotted it.
Interesting.
So it's really a very, I don't even know how I thought of it. It just started and ended.
Well, if it starts and it ends, it's probably a pretty good book. Now, where can they need to go to the website? Where else?
Well, you can get them. Reading Rock Bookstore has all mine. Waverly Cafe has some of my books. You can download them on Kindle. Most of them are $2.99. The Minister's Haunting is $3.99 at this point. Or you can order print on demand from Ingram through Amazon.
Awesome. Well, we'll certainly get this up on our Facebook and website.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Where we can share it with some folks. And
well, a writer writes, and if the reader doesn't read, you've wasted your time.
Well, you certainly want people to read it. I agree with that. Miss Sue Alexander has been our guest for the first half of the program here. Anything else we need to cover before we let you go?
No, it's been a privilege, and I just thank you.
Well, we have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. I'm excited about it. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out and talk with us. Everybody go. Certainly, if you're interested in publishing your own books, or you're curious about how to write, that sort of thing, Come down to Reading Rock Books tomorrow at 11 a.m. and get tips on how to self-publish and organize your thoughts and all of that. And we'll step aside for a break for news. Be back here on the Power Lunch.